We give thanks for the morning light and ask for strength for the day's labor.
The village of Isenwa rested quietly among rolling hills, its small, sun-baked houses clustered along winding dirt paths. In the mornings, the air carried the sweet scent of earth and fresh herbs. Villagers rose before dawn, performing rituals and prayers that had been passed down for generations. Life here was measured by seasons, faith, and tradition, threads that wove the community tightly together. But not everyone shared in the village's reverence. At the edge of Isenwa, where the land rose slightly to a rocky hill, lived Arin, a man whose presence seemed to cast a shadow over even the brightest mornings. Tall, sharp-eyed, and impeccably dressed, he walked with a certainty that bordered on arrogance. His home, built of polished wood and stone, was larger than any other in the village, a constant symbol of wealth and power. Yet even grand walls could not hide the disdain in Arin's heart for those who prayed and trusted in what he called invisible forces. Every day, Arin passed by the modest home of the Abinis, a humble family whose devotion to prayer and community was known by all. Mama Abini, soft-spoken and serene, carried herself with quiet strength. Her husband, Papa Abini, worked tirelessly in the fields, and together they nurtured their children with love and faith. Their home was simple, its walls cracked and worn, but it radiated warmth and peace. Arin, however, saw only foolishness. One morning, as he rode past the Abini's hut on his horse, he could not resist the urge to mock. "Look at them," he shouted, his voice cutting through the soft hum of the village. "Kneeling to shadows while real work lies before them. Pray all you want, and see where it gets you." The children froze in place, embarrassed, while Mama Abini lowered her eyes, saying nothing. Papa Abini's hand rested on his plow as he listened, silent, unshaken. The villagers nearby exchanged uneasy glances. They knew better than to confront Arin, who carried pride like armor. Arin's ridicule was not limited to words. He scoffed at offerings, laughed at rituals, and dismissed the prayers of strangers with derision. A woman once offered him water from her clay jug, and he tossed it aside, muttering, "Do you think I need your poor gifts to survive?" When a traveling preacher spoke of mercy and divine guidance, Arin walked away, head held high, convinced that only gold and intelligence could shape a person's destiny. Despite his mockery, the Abinis continued their daily prayers, bowing humbly in the morning light. They faced hardship with a calm resolve, never speaking ill, never seeking revenge. Their quiet strength contrasted sharply with Arin's loud, demanding presence. It was a difference that did not escape the villagers' notice. Yet even as he mocked them, Arin could not fully ignore the Abini's peace. Something about their unwavering calm stirred a flicker of unease in him, an uncomfortable thought that maybe wealth and pride were not enough to protect him from the uncertainties of life. He pushed the idea away. Pride, he told himself, was power. Faith was a crutch for the weak. Small incidents hinted that Arin's arrogance might carry consequences. Children whispered stories about misfortune following those who mocked the faithful. Elders shook their heads knowingly when they saw him sneer. Even the Abini's steady eyes seemed to silently warn, pride blinds the heart, and the proud often stumble. But Arin paid no heed. He continued his morning inspections of the fields and livestock, his counting of coins, and his endless calculations of profit. He saw the village's devotion as nothing more than superstition, and he considered himself above it all. He believed life could be conquered with cunning and wealth alone, and that faith, so freely given by others, was laughable. Still, beneath the laughter and the sharp tongue, a subtle tension lingered. Arin's world was orderly now, but even the proudest structures have cracks. And in those quiet, unobserved moments, when he passed the Abini's home and caught a glimpse of their serene faces, a small, unwelcome thought crept in: what if they were right? What if his wealth and pride could not shield him forever? For now, Arin laughed at the thought, dismissing it with the same arrogance that defined him. Yet the first seeds of doubt had been planted, and unseen by him, the story of his fall, if it were to come, had already begun to stir. Arin's life had always been one of control. Every coin, every seed, every contract had followed his careful calculations. But the morning of the first disaster arrived like a silent thief. He stepped onto the terrace of his grand home, surveying his field stretched out below. The soil, once fertile and promising, was cracked and dry, with rows of seedlings curled in defeat under the scorching sun. Rain had been absent for weeks, and what little water he had tried to conserve had been wasted on a poorly designed irrigation system. "This is impossible," Arin barked, pacing. His workers, seasoned in their loyalty but fearful of his temper, avoided meeting his gaze. "I paid for this land, nurtured it myself, and still, nothing. This is a disaster." Days turned into weeks, and the failures multiplied. A business partner he had trusted for years disappeared with a shipment meant for trade in the nearby towns. Money that he had once held as a shield against misfortune now felt fragile and meaningless. Each setback gnawed at him, and his usual confidence cracked under the weight of relentless misfortune. Arin was not accustomed to helplessness. His pride had always been his strength, and he could not fathom a world where wealth and cleverness could fail. He attempted every possible solution, hiring new laborers, bribing officials to secure business deals, redesigning irrigation, even consulting experts from distant towns. Each attempt ended in disaster. The fields remained barren. The merchants he sought to appease were wary of a man whose fortunes now seemed unstable. His illness, minor at first, began to drain his strength. His face, once strong and confident, grew pale, and shadows formed beneath sharp eyes. As Arin's desperation grew, so too did his isolation. The villagers, who had once been cautious in his presence, now stepped carefully around him. Some whispered of his misfortunes, others stared silently, unsure whether to pity or avoid him. The Abinis, in particular, drew his attention, but not in the way he wanted. One evening, as Arin returned from yet another failed attempt to salvage his crops, he noticed the Abinis working quietly in their garden. Mama Abini moved with serene purpose, guiding the children as they planted seeds, while Papa Abini hummed a low tune, his hands steady and sure. Every so often, they would pause, bowing their heads in prayer before planting another row. Their calm composure struck him like a physical blow. "How can they be so peaceful?" Arin muttered under his breath. "While my world collapses, they smile and pray to, what? To nothing." That night, as he lay in his vast bedroom, staring at the ceiling, Arin's mind churned. The Abini's tranquility refused to leave him. Even as he clutched the ledger of his losses, even as he counted the empty coins in his pockets, their calm, patient faith haunted him. For the first time, he felt an unfamiliar sensation, doubt. Yet pride would not allow him to surrender. Arin tried to fight it, telling himself that their peace was foolishness, that the world belonged to those who seized it with action and force. But misfortune did not respect pride. The illness worsened, the crops failed entirely, and the community he once dominated now watched silently as he faltered. Arin's frustration reached a boiling point one morning when he found a shipment of spoiled goods stacked in his storehouse. He slammed his fists against the wooden beams. "Why is nothing working? I have spent my life building this, and yet, nothing. I am the master of my world. I will not be undone by these." He trailed off, anger giving way to despair. The villagers noticed his struggles, yet none dared intervene. Even the Abinis continued their daily routines, unfazed. There was no pity in their eyes, only steady calm and faith that seemed almost tangible. Arin felt a pang of envy he did not understand. How could they maintain such serenity while his life crumbled? In quiet moments, he began to observe them more closely. He saw Papa Abini kneeling in the early light, Mama Abini's lips moving in prayer, children offering simple thanks for a meal. Each prayer seemed to carry weight, a quiet power that Arin could not deny. It unsettled him, stirring a mix of fear, curiosity, and, deep down, something like admiration. But Arin could not yet act on these feelings. Pride still ruled his heart. Asking for help, especially from those he had ridiculed, was unthinkable. Yet, as days turned into nights filled with frustration and sleeplessness, a small, uncomfortable truth began to take root: perhaps his wealth, his schemes, his cleverness, were not enough to control fate. Perhaps there was a power beyond him, something unseen, something real, that the Abinis were calling upon every day. The stage was set. Arin's world, built on pride and material control, was failing. The villagers watched, tense and quiet. And as the Abinis moved through their evening prayers, steady and serene, Arin felt a stirring in his chest that he could neither name nor ignore, the faintest whisper of humility, and the first, fragile hint that his mockery of faith might one day cost him more than he could imagine. Arin's world, once secure and orderly, now trembled under the weight of relentless misfortune. Every morning, he awoke to a new calamity. His body, once strong and unyielding, now ached with fatigue he could not shake. The illness that had first whispered in his chest now roared, leaving him pale and weak. Even standing, he felt the tremor of weakness ripple through his limbs. His confidence, the armor that had carried him through life, was gone. The fields that had once been his pride were barren. The crops rotted in the soil, the land refusing to yield anything despite his best efforts. Money, the one thing he had always trusted, seemed to mock him. Debts accumulated, merchants turned wary, and the once loyal workers abandoned their posts, leaving him to stare at ruined shelves and empty storehouses. Every attempt to regain control ended in failure, and each failure left a deeper wound in his pride. Arin tried everything. He traveled to neighboring towns seeking advice from the wisest merchants, hoping their experience could save him. He consulted doctors, spending vast sums on treatments that brought only temporary relief, if any. He poured more wealth into the land, hiring laborers from distant villages, buying the finest seeds, and improving irrigation systems. Yet nothing worked. The illness remained, the crops failed, and his debts only grew. The more he struggled, the more powerless he felt. And yet, he still did not turn to prayer. Pride, stubborn and unyielding, refused to bow. "I have built this life with my hands, my mind, and my gold," he told himself at night. "I need no one else. I answer to no one." But reality would not be ignored. One evening, after another fruitless journey to a merchant who had once considered him a friend, Arin returned to his mansion to find it empty and silent. Even his servants had left, unable to tolerate the endless tension and anger. Arin sat in the grand hall, his head in his hands, and for the first time felt the crushing weight of true loneliness. He was alone, truly alone, facing the consequences of a life spent mocking faith, belittling others, and relying only on himself. It was then, in the quiet of the fading sun, that Arin's gaze drifted across the valley. The Abini's home, modest and worn, glowed softly in the evening light. Through a small window, he saw Papa Abini kneeling beside Mama Abini and the children, heads bowed, hands clasped in prayer. Their voices were low, but steady, filled with an inner calm that seemed impossible in contrast to Arin's turmoil. A strange feeling stirred in Arin's chest, a mix of envy, fear, and awe. How could they remain so composed, so confident, when the world offered them no guarantees? Every night, he had fought his doubts, insisting that wealth and intellect were the only forces that mattered. Yet here, before his eyes, was a quiet power he had never considered. He tried to turn away, to dismiss what he saw. But that sight haunted him. In the following days, Arin found himself watching from a distance as the Abinis prayed, helped their neighbors, and accepted hardships with grace. Their faith was not loud or showy, it was quiet, steadfast, and somehow alive. Arin could not understand it, and yet, the feeling it stirred in him refused to fade. Anger and fear battled within him. He wanted to rage, to prove that faith was meaningless, that only action and money counted. But every plan he devised ended in frustration, every effort to reclaim control failed. In the mirror, he saw a man broken not by enemies, not by misfortune, but by the truth he had long refused to face: he was powerless. One night, as he wandered his empty halls, Arin collapsed near the grand window overlooking the valley. Tears, unfamiliar and unwelcome, blurred his vision. The Abini's house stood there, lights flickering softly, the sound of quiet prayers drifting through the air. He could no longer deny the stark contrast between their serenity and his desperation. For the first time, he questioned everything. Could there be a force greater than wealth, greater than pride? Could their prayers, their faith, really hold power he had always scorned? A part of him, a small, trembling part, wanted to believe. But belief required surrender, humility, and admission of his failures. Pride, the trait that had defined him all his life, made this impossible. And yet, the thought would not leave him. Every failure, every moment of weakness, every pang of isolation pushed him closer to a truth he could not yet name. His mind replayed the countless times he had mocked others' prayers, laughed at those who trusted in unseen powers, and scorned the Abinis for their humility. Each memory now carried weight, a painful reminder that arrogance had limits, and that the very people he had ridiculed might hold the key to saving him. That night, Arin sat alone, trembling, as the moonlight washed over his mansion. For the first time, the world felt larger than him, more complex than gold or cunning could conquer. Somewhere in the valley below, a quiet prayer rose from the Abini's home. It was not loud, not demanding, but it carried a presence that seemed to touch even the edges of Arin's hardened heart. And in that presence, Arin felt the first stirrings of humility, the faintest recognition that his life, his plans, and his pride were not enough. He was at a crossroads, continue to cling to arrogance, or admit he needed something beyond himself. Pride would not allow him to speak the words aloud, but inside, the seed of transformation had been planted. The stage was set for Arin to face the most difficult challenge of all, surrendering to a power he had spent a lifetime denying. The morning mist clung to the village of Isenwa, curling around the humble homes and twisting along the paths that led to the fields. Arin, once proud and commanding, walked slowly through the village, his head bowed, shoulders heavy with the weight of his failures. Each step felt foreign, unfamiliar. He, the man who had always carried himself with certainty, now hesitated as though the earth itself might betray him. He approached the Abini's modest home, a place he had long mocked, now appearing to him like a sanctuary he had no right to enter. His pride warred with necessity, every instinct screamed to turn away, to continue relying on what little control he still held. Yet, the desperation in his chest was stronger than arrogance. His failures had stripped him bare, his wealth, his power, his schemes, all meaningless against the tide of misfortune. At the doorway, Arin hesitated. Mama Abini stood outside, sweeping the small yard, her eyes calm and steady. She looked up, meeting his gaze without surprise, without judgment. "Arin," she said softly, "it is morning. Come, share a moment of peace." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Pride fought to keep him silent, but need was louder than fear. Finally, he forced the words out, voice rough with vulnerability. I need help. I do not know what else to do." Mama Abini did not reply immediately. She simply gestured toward the small courtyard, where the children were gathering to help with chores and planting. Papa Abini emerged from the fields, wiping sweat from his brow. His gaze met Arin's, steady and unflinching. "Then come," he said, "and let us seek guidance together." The villagers, watching from a distance, whispered in astonishment. Arin, the man who had mocked prayers, who had ridiculed their faith, was now humbling himself. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others felt a twinge of hope, for if even Arin could turn, perhaps others could as well. Inside the small courtyard, the Abinis guided Arin to a simple wooden bench. Mama Abini placed her hands gently on his shoulders, and for the first time in his life, Arin felt the warmth of compassion untainted by fear or obligation. "We do not mock your struggles," she said softly. "We do not measure faith by the strength of pride, but by the courage to seek help when it is needed." Arin's throat tightened. His voice caught in his chest as he admitted aloud what he had never confessed. I have lived my life believing only in myself. I mocked faith. I mocked those who trusted in something beyond sight. And now, I do not know how to fix anything. The Abini's children, small and innocent, watched quietly. They did not recoil or laugh. Instead, they offered Arin small gestures of kindness, a flower, a hand to steady him as he sank onto the bench. These simple acts, so ordinary in the Abini's world, struck Arin with a force he could not resist. Humility, he realized, was not weakness, it was the first step toward something far greater than pride. Mama Abini knelt beside him. "Prayer is not magic, Arin," she said gently. "It is the way we open ourselves to hope, to guidance, and to strength we cannot summon alone. It is the way we reach beyond ourselves when we are broken." Arin listened, each word settling into the corners of his mind where arrogance had long reigned. He wanted to protest, to assert his disbelief, but he found no strength to argue. Every failure, every loss, every sleepless night had already taught him a painful truth: control was an illusion, and pride alone could not save him. Under the Abini's guidance, Arin attempted his first prayers. At first, the words felt foreign, awkward, almost absurd. His hands shook, his voice faltered. But the Abinis were patient, guiding him gently, showing that prayer was not performance, but surrender. Each whispered word, each pause to reflect, carried a weight he had never known. As days passed, Arin continued to visit the Abinis. He helped with chores, planting, and small tasks, not as a master commanding workers, but as one learning to serve, to observe, to trust. Each action stripped away the layers of arrogance he had long wrapped around himself. With each prayer, with each act of humility, a small part of his heart softened. The villagers watched this transformation in awe and caution. Some were skeptical, unwilling to believe that Arin could truly change. Others were hopeful, seeing that even the proudest heart could bend in the face of need. Gossip and curiosity spread, but the Abinis remained calm, showing Arin that change is nurtured quietly, without spectacle. Inside himself, Arin felt an awakening. The anger and fear that had driven him now mingled with remorse. He thought of every insult, every ridicule, every scornful laugh he had directed at those who prayed. Each memory carried weight, and each act of humility now felt like a small penance. For the first time, he understood that faith required more than words, it required surrender, trust, and willingness to change. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Arin knelt beside Papa and Mama Abini, hands trembling, heart pounding. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as he spoke words he had once thought impossible: I do not know if I am worthy. I do not know if I can be forgiven. But I am ready to try. Papa Abini placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Faith is not about worthiness, Arin. It is about opening the heart when it is heavy. It is about asking for guidance when we are lost. And you have begun that journey. Tears came unbidden to Arin's eyes. They were not tears of weakness, but of release, a surrender he had never known he could make. The first cracks in his armor of pride had opened, and through them, a new possibility shone: redemption, hope, and the chance to reclaim not only his life but his humanity. In the days that followed, Arin's transformation began to take root. He helped the Abinis in their daily work, learned the rhythms of prayer, and slowly shed the arrogance that had defined him for so long. Each morning, he rose before dawn, not to count coins or plan schemes, but to offer thanks and seek guidance. Each evening, he reflected on his failures, his pride, and the small ways in which faith and humility could restore him. Though the journey was only beginning, Arin felt the first stirrings of hope. For the first time, he understood that strength did not come from wealth or cunning alone, it came from surrender, from connection, and from faith. The stage was set. Arin had reached across the chasm of his own pride, borrowed the faith he had once mocked, and begun the most difficult journey of all, learning to trust in something greater than himself. The weeks that followed Arin's humble appeal were filled with quiet transformation, but peace was fleeting. The village of Isenwa remained as unpredictable as life itself, and Arin soon discovered that surrender alone could not erase the trials of the world. Even as he knelt each morning in prayer with the Abinis, guiding his heart toward faith and humility, new challenges arose. One morning, Arin returned from tending the Abinis' small fields to discover that a sudden storm had destroyed much of his remaining crops. The soil, soaked and churned by heavy rain, was now almost useless. He felt a familiar pang of panic rising, but this time it came with a whisper of doubt. He could not fight the world alone. The Abinis approached him calmly. Mama Abini's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. The rain has come, and with it, hardship. But hardship does not mean failure. Sometimes it is in the struggle that faith is tested and strengthened. Arin's chest tightened. I have tried everything. My wealth, my plans, my labor. Nothing works. His voice trembled with frustration and fear. How can prayer help when the world itself seems against me? Papa Abini placed a hand over his. Faith does not remove challenges, Arin. It gives us the strength to face them. It shows us what we can endure and how to endure it with courage and wisdom. It was a lesson hard learned. Arin worked tirelessly to repair the damage, guided by both practical knowledge and the Abini's quiet wisdom. He discovered that faith was not passive, it demanded action. He planted new seeds, repaired fences, and shared labor with neighbors who had once watched him with suspicion. Each act was a test, not just of strength, but of character. Yet challenges continued to mount. A merchant who had once promised to trade with him betrayed his trust, refusing delivery and taking advantage of Arin's weakened position. Villagers whispered behind his back, wondering if the proud man who had mocked prayer was truly transformed or simply desperate. Arin felt the old anger and frustration rise, but he remembered the Abini's calm eyes, their unwavering faith, and the first seeds of humility he had planted within himself. Night after night, he wrestled with himself. Doubt clung to him like a shadow. Am I truly changed, or am I merely scared, he wondered. The question haunted him as he knelt beside the Abinis in prayer, hands shaking, heart heavy with the weight of past failures. Each whispered word, each pause for reflection, forced him to confront the truths he had long denied, that humility was not weakness, that faith required surrender, and that courage often meant asking for help. Through these trials, Arin began to see the subtle ways in which faith could guide action. He learned patience, noticing that solutions often came slowly, through persistent effort and careful observation rather than force. He discovered empathy, helping neighbors whose homes had been damaged by the same storm that had ruined his fields. He began to forgive, not only others but himself, for past arrogance and cruelty. One day, a new challenge arrived that tested him more than any storm or failed business deal. A fire broke out in the village. It started in a nearby hut, spreading quickly through the dry fields and thatched roofs. Panic swept through Isenwa, and for a moment, Arin's old instincts surged, self-preservation, anger, frustration. But he paused, remembering the Abini's teachings. Fear alone could not save him or anyone else. Arin ran toward the danger, heart pounding, not for pride, not for gold, but because he had learned to care beyond himself. He helped neighbors carry water, guided children to safety, and worked alongside the Abinis to contain the fire. The hours were long, exhausting, and terrifying. At every step, he relied on the strength that prayer and faith had begun to give him, whispering quiet pleas for guidance and protection. By evening, the fire was contained, though damage remained. Arin's hands were blistered, his clothes scorched, his heart exhausted, but something new had blossomed within him. He had faced danger not as a proud skeptic, but as a man willing to surrender fear, trust in a higher power, and act with courage and compassion. In the following days, the villagers began to see the real change in Arin. Where once his presence inspired fear or envy, now it inspired cautious admiration. He worked tirelessly to repair homes, help the displaced, and share resources he had once hoarded. Every act of service, every prayer, every moment of humility reinforced the transformation that had begun months earlier. Yet Arin's journey was not complete. He still faced inner battles, the temptation to revert to pride, the fear that his faith might fail him, the lingering doubt about whether he was truly deserving of redemption. Each morning, he knelt beside the Abinis, confessing his fears and seeking guidance. Each evening, he reflected on his failures, the lessons of the day, and the small victories that faith had helped him achieve. The Abini's patience never wavered. Mama Abini would speak softly, "Faith is not measured by perfection, Arin, but by perseverance. The trials you face are not punishment, they are opportunities to grow stronger, to see who you truly are." Papa Abini added, "True faith is tested in the fire of experience. Wealth, pride, and intellect cannot teach what humility, love, and trust can. You have begun to learn this, and that is why you endure." Arin began to understand. He realized that faith was not an escape from hardship but a guide through it. Strength was not measured by control or power, but by the ability to endure, to act with compassion, and to trust in what could not always be seen. By the end of this chapter in his life, Arin had grown in ways he had never imagined. He had faced natural disaster, betrayal, and fear, not with the arrogance of a proud man, but with the courage of one who had begun to surrender, to trust, and to act in alignment with faith and humility. And still, a greater test awaited, a challenge that would demand not only faith, but courage, wisdom, and the strength to unite his newfound humility with action. But Arin was no longer the man he had been. The proud skeptic had begun to transform, step by step, prayer by prayer, act by act. The stage was now set for the final trials that would lead him to full redemption, a journey that would test the limits of faith, reveal the power of humility, and ultimately restore not only his life but his spirit. The morning sun rose over Izinwa with a fragile light, illuminating the village that had endured so much. Arin, once a figure of arrogance and mockery, now walked among his neighbors with a quiet purpose. The trials of storms, betrayal, and fire had tested him, but the true challenge awaited, a crisis that would demand not only humility and faith but courage, wisdom, and action beyond himself. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Smoke drifted from the distant hills, carried on the wind. Villagers paused in their daily routines, sensing the first hint of danger. Arin, eyes narrowed, felt a strange mix of fear and determination. This was no ordinary challenge, the fire threatened not only his property but the entire community. He ran toward the Abini's home, finding Mama Abini already organizing the children, while Papa Abini gathered water from the well. "Arin," Papa Abini said, "this is the moment. You have learned humility, patience, and faith. Now you must act with courage." Arin nodded, heart pounding. Every lesson from the past months, the prayers, the quiet acts of service, the surrender of pride, culminated in this moment. He did not hesitate. He joined the villagers, directing them calmly, combining the practical knowledge he had once relied on alone with the wisdom of faith he had now embraced. The fire raged, consuming dry grass and threatening homes. Arin coordinated bucket brigades, guided families to safety, and encouraged those too afraid to act. Where once he would have shouted orders with anger and pride, he now led with patience and clarity. His voice, steady and authoritative, carried the weight of experience and the humility of one who had faced failure. At one point, a small child became trapped near the edge of the fire. Arin risked himself without hesitation, lifting the child into his arms and carrying them to safety. In that act, the villagers saw not the proud skeptic who had mocked faith but a man transformed, courageous, compassionate, and guided by something far greater than himself. Hours passed. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, yet Arin continued, relying not only on his strength but on the faith that had guided him through every trial. He whispered quiet prayers, seeking guidance, protection, and the wisdom to act correctly. And slowly, steadily, the tide turned. Together, the villagers contained the fire, saving homes, crops, and lives. When the smoke cleared and the last flames were extinguished, the village stood in stunned relief. Arin's hands were blistered, his clothes scorched, and his body trembling, but his eyes shone with something new, recognition of the power of humility, faith, and human connection. Mama Abini approached him, smiling gently. "You have done well, Arin," she said. "You have acted not for pride, not for wealth, but for life, for others, for hope. That is true strength." Arin's chest tightened. I could not have done it without you," he admitted, voice low. "Without your guidance, your prayers. I would have failed." Papa Abini placed a hand on his shoulder. "Faith is not about being alone. It is about opening your heart, trusting in what you cannot see, and acting when it matters. You have done both." The villagers, who had once viewed Arin with fear and disdain, now approached with tentative smiles and gestures of respect. Children ran to thank him for saving lives, neighbors offered kind words, and the whispers of admiration spread through the village. Arin felt a sense of connection he had never known, a bond forged not through wealth or power, but through courage, humility, and shared faith. For the first time, Arin understood the meaning of true redemption. It was not a single act or a moment of triumph. It was a transformation of the heart, a willingness to recognize one's faults, to embrace humility, and to act with compassion and faith even in the face of fear and uncertainty. He thought of all the moments that had led him here, the ridicule he had poured on the Abinis, the arrogance that had isolated him, the failures that had humbled him. Each experience had been a step along the path, a lesson etched in pain and reflection. And now, standing amid the village he had once looked down upon, Arin felt a profound sense of gratitude. Later that evening, as the village gathered to repair damaged homes and restore what had been lost, Arin knelt beside the Abinis in quiet prayer. His words were humble, his heart open. He asked for guidance, for strength to continue walking the path of humility, and for forgiveness, for himself and for the arrogance he had once carried. Mama Abini placed her hand over his, a silent affirmation of his journey. "Faith, Arin," she said softly, "is not about never failing. It is about rising each time, learning, and helping others rise as well." Arin nodded, tears forming in his eyes. He realized that he had not only saved his life and reputation but had begun a journey of inner transformation that would endure for the rest of his days. He had discovered that humility was not weakness, that faith could guide even the most lost heart, and that true strength lay in connection, compassion, and trust in something beyond oneself. As night fell over Izinwa, the village glowed with quiet warmth. The Abini's home, modest and serene, symbolized the power of steadfast faith. Arin's mansion, once a monument to pride, now stood as a reminder that true wealth lay not in gold or possessions, but in the courage to change, the wisdom to act with compassion, and the humility to seek guidance beyond oneself. Arin looked across the village, at neighbors who had once feared him, at children who now ran to greet him with smiles, and at the Abinis, whose quiet strength had guided him from despair to redemption. A sense of peace, deep and lasting, settled over him. He understood that his journey was not over, but he had taken the first steps toward a life of meaning, faith, and genuine connection. For the first time, Arin felt free. Free from pride, free from fear, and free from the isolation that had defined his life. In its place, he carried hope, humility, and the recognition that faith, even when once mocked, could illuminate the path through life's darkest trials. The village of Izinwa had settled into a calm rhythm once more. The storm had passed, the fire had been contained, and the fields, though scarred, began to show signs of new life. Yet among the villagers, the true change was not only in the land, it was in the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed the remarkable transformation of one man. Arin walked along the village paths, now not with pride, but with a quiet confidence born of humility and faith. The once arrogant man who had mocked prayers and ridiculed the faithful now moved with a purpose that inspired rather than intimidated. Villagers who had once feared him smiled and greeted him warmly. Children ran to meet him, laughing, no longer seeing him as a figure of ridicule but as a protector and guide. Arin's reflection often took him to the Abini's home, where faith had been his guide and humility his teacher. He had learned that strength did not lie in gold, power, or intellect alone, it lay in surrender, trust, compassion, and the courage to act when others needed you most. Every prayer he whispered, every small act of service he performed, was a reminder of the journey that had brought him from arrogance to enlightenment. He remembered vividly the moment he had knelt beside the Abanis for the first time, admitting his helplessness and seeking guidance. At that time, fear, shame, and pride had been his constant companions. Now, those emotions had transformed into understanding, gratitude, and love, for his neighbors, for the Abanis, and for the power of faith itself. The villagers, too, felt the ripple of change. Where once they had endured Arin's arrogance silently, now they saw a man who could admit fault, ask for help, and act selflessly. His transformation became a living lesson for the community, that even the proudest heart can change, that humility can inspire trust, and that faith, quiet, steadfast, and sincere, can guide lives through darkness. Arin took part in the daily rhythms of the village, not as a master commanding others, but as a fellow human, learning and serving alongside them. He helped repair homes, guided younger villagers in both practical tasks and moral lessons, and shared resources once hoarded in fear of loss. The wealth he had clung to so fiercely became a tool for good rather than a weapon of pride. One evening, Arin sat alone on a hillside overlooking the village, the sun casting long, golden shadows over the land. He reflected on the journey that had brought him here, the ridicule he had once poured on the Abanis, the arrogance that had isolated him, the trials of misfortune, and the guidance that had finally taught him humility. Each memory, once a source of shame, now carried a lesson, a reminder of the path he had walked and the man he had become. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, not out of fear or obligation, but out of gratitude and recognition. "Thank you," he murmured, voice trembling with sincerity. "For showing me the way, for teaching me humility, and for letting me see the strength that comes from faith, love, and compassion." The Abanis approached quietly, their presence familiar and comforting. Mama Abini smiled softly. "Your heart has changed, Arin," she said. "Faith is not about never falling. It is about rising after each fall, learning, and helping others rise as well." Papa Abini added, "The journey is ongoing, but you have taken the hardest steps. You have embraced humility, sought guidance, and acted with courage. That is true faith, and that is the beginning of lasting change." Arin nodded, tears forming in his eyes. He understood now that redemption was not a single act or moment, it was a lifetime of choices, a series of small actions guided by sincerity, humility, and love. He had learned to forgive himself for past mistakes, to forgive others, and to embrace a life enriched not by possessions, but by compassion, connection, and faith. Word of Arin's transformation spread through Izinwa and beyond. Travelers who had known him as a proud, mocking man were astonished to hear of the change. Villagers began to share his story with others, not as gossip, but as a testament to the power of humility and faith. Children listened wide-eyed, understanding that even those who stumble in arrogance can rise through courage and trust. Yet Arin did not seek recognition. His journey was not about accolades but about integrity, faith, and service. He continued to rise before dawn, working beside the Abanis, tending the land, helping neighbors, and offering prayers that came from a heart softened by experience. Each day became a living reflection of lessons learned, a continuous act of redemption and service. As the seasons turned, the village flourished. Crops thrived, the community grew closer, and Arin became a respected figure, not for his wealth or authority, but for his wisdom, humility, and the courage to embrace faith when it mattered most. His story became a symbol of hope for those who doubted, a reminder that pride can be transformed into humility, and that faith, once mocked, can illuminate even the darkest paths. One quiet evening, as Arin knelt in the soft glow of twilight, he whispered a prayer for the village, for the Abanis, and for himself. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of earth and life, and he felt a profound connection to all that he had once taken for granted. He realized that the true treasure of life was not gold or power, but the ability to love, to forgive, and to trust in something greater than oneself. The village of Izinwa had witnessed not just the restoration of crops or homes, but the restoration of a human heart. Arin's journey, once marked by pride and failure, had become a testament to the power of humility, faith, and compassion. It reminded all who knew him that even in the face of hardship, the choice to act with sincerity and courage can transform lives. And so, life in Isenwa continued, richer and stronger. Arin, once the proud skeptic, now walked the village paths with a heart open to love, faith, and service. His prayers were no longer a foreign act but a natural expression of gratitude. His hands, once used to command and control, were now tools for healing, helping, and nurturing. In the quiet of dawn, when the village still slept, Arin would sometimes rise alone, kneel upon the earth, and speak to the unseen power that had guided him. Not in fear, not in arrogance, but in hope, trust, and reverence. In those moments, he found peace, the profound peace of a man who had faced himself, admitted his weaknesses, embraced humility, and discovered the true strength that comes from faith, compassion, and redemption. The story of Arin and the Abinis became a lasting lesson for Isenwa, that pride is fragile, humility is transformative, and faith, when embraced sincerely, can change even the hardest hearts. And in that quiet, enduring truth, the village found not only restoration but inspiration, a reminder that the journey toward goodness and faith is never truly complete, but always worth taking.